Okay, this is going to be our question and answer period. Let's make sure, actually, that Lindsay and Bill can share that microphone too. Let's start out with questions for the first three speakers today. Look back at your notes, any questions that came up about their scenarios, or if you want to run your scenario by them based on their presentation. We've got a microphone right here. Let me just see if I can also move it. We're going to get tangled if I do that. So come on up. Questions for the panel?
Hi, quick question for Patty, who said, I believe, that you won't actually hold meetings with the EAB if you know there's an editor in revolt, and I'm just curious how you can make that not happen, because I feel like sometimes there are expectations that
Make
that
the
meeting happens.
editorial board not happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, most of the time, I'm pushing the editors to have the EAB meetings, so I just don't mention it. In the few times that they have, mentioned, and I'm trying to think in my head if there's actually been a time when somebody mentioned having an EAB meeting without me first mentioning it. And so I'm not really sure what I would do if they said, let's have one, when I know he's angry at me, or not me, angry at publishing. Like distractors are often just angry at publishers and the publishing process. I'm not sure. Anybody have any suggestions on how to avoid an EAB meeting when there's been a set pattern for having one at the conference every year? I'd probably just say, listen, I don't think I'm up to it.
Well, you could give the editor the wrong location.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, if I have an editor that is, if they're disgruntled, and we're having an editorial board meeting, I try to have a separate meeting with just the editor. Maybe I take them out to dinner, maybe we meet for coffee, just sort of let them get it out of their system, so that then we can focus at the editorial board meeting on what we're there to do. I found that really helps, because it's sort of, they get a chance. A lot of people, when they're upset, they just want to be heard. You provide a venue for them to do that. It's just the two of you or three of you, however many people are involved. It usually helps sort of calm their nerves before you go into the actual meeting. If the meeting has to happen, if it's inevitable, I try and separate the two.
That's really good strategy. And yeah, I'm going to take that as my own. Thank you. I also think that for the most part, with Bill, for the most part, my editors have really been great over the years too, or I wouldn't still be in publishing. But I find my own, if I have the more difficult the conversation is to have, the more I'm going to do it in person. So if it's just slightly, difficult, an email. If it's a little difficult, a telephone call. If it is really, really difficult, it's in person. Because I find that people's reactions to difficult situations are much more reasoned when it's in person. And the further away they are from that personal contact, the more likely they feel like they can just act like buffoons. So.
Okay. Other questions for the panel? We discovered there it's easy to hear too, so.
Hi, I actually have several questions for Bill, but I'll bombard you during the break. Have you ever had a disagreement about a retraction with an editor? So maybe the editor wants to retract a paper, it's contested, you looked into it, maybe it's not retractable, or vice versa?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a retraction. We have a journal that does personal narratives. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a journal that publishes personal narratives. And they did a good job of de-identifying the individuals in the narrative. So the journal, what happens is a sibling wrote a narrative and identified a medical issue that was genetic within the family. And the sibling took offense because by default, she had been identified. So we did have a situation with that where we were thinking about taking down the electronic version of it. There is what is it? Is it COPE? Is that the organization? So we did work with them on it to get their advice, and we did end up taking it down because we just felt like we probably hadn't de-identified it enough. It should have been anonymous anyway, right? I mean, if we're talking about a genetic situation with a family and you have the person's name, probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. That's about it. I mean, there are other situations where there's an attempt to redact articles all the time, and we reject that, obviously.
Great. Someone else had questions? Someone else was going to get up? Okay.
Can you hear me from here?
Yep.
Yeah.
I guess actually, I remembered they are taping these, so why don't you come up so they can hear that also?
And if you could identify yourselves as well, especially since they're taping them.
Sure,
Record.
okay. I'm Malavika from Portland Press, the publishing arm of the Biochemical Society. I had one question probably for Patty and one question probably for Lindsay. Patty, I wanted to ask, what do you do, or what's your top tip for in the there and then of the editorial board meeting if your editor-in-chief is not running it? If they have wandered off the agenda or, just gone completely off point or doing that thing of throwing you under the bus or all those sorts of things. What's your top tip for that kind of in the there and then?
Yeah, right then and there. And so I think I'd go back to the standard running a meeting the way, that the tips they give you on those, which is go back to the agenda, gently move, let's move back to the agenda. We have a lot to accomplish in trying to get to the agenda. And that's probably my top tip. I will, like all of the worst case scenario board meetings, I don't generally, with a new editor in his first EAB meeting, I don't try to prep them for any of those horrible cases, because then they'll never want another EAB meeting, right? So I kind of have to let it go organically, and then try to push the meeting back to the agenda, and hope there's not a distractor who uses that to make me the leader of the meeting. You see how that goes? And so then, and hope that it just doesn't spiral out of control where, I head up to my room for the rest of the conference and never go back out again. And then after the meeting, and before the following year, I'll then readdress so that he or she knows that the expectation is that the meeting's theirs. And then I handle it a little bit different from that way forward. But I try to let it go organically first and not be too heavy-handed on. I mean, they're professionals, most of them are senior professors. They know how to run a meeting theoretically.
Anything you want to add, Lindsay?
Did you have a separate question for me, or?
Yes, please, if that's okay. So you talked about one of the tips you provided was say, okay, I'll look into it, which is a really useful response, and I know full well the helpfulness of just being able to say that. What happens in a situation where it was a crazy idea, you're even immediately there thinking, oh geez, no, and they come back to it in a formal setting, or they press you on it, or they go, oh, so we raised this, and what have you found, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, so, I think a lot of this depends on the type of people that you're dealing with, and like you, I've been very lucky that the editors that I've dealt with have, as a whole, been extremely reasonable people, where in the course of our calls, as we sort of got adjusted to one another, and they came up with something that was completely fruity, I would say, I don't think that's ever going to work in a million years. It's not because the previous editors didn't do it that way, or we don't do it. It's just that is not how things work at all. So, I mean, I try to be pretty honest when I can, and when I really don't know the answer, and I, either talk to the publisher or do some research or look into it, and it really comes back as this isn't going to work. I mean, I really haven't had, when I come back to them and say, this isn't going to work, they tend to just take it. I haven't gotten to a point where I've been in an editorial board meeting and they're like, well, we want this to happen, and she says it can't. And that hasn't happened to me, so I don't know how I would deal with that. But I tend to rely on the authority of the publisher, if that will work, or, established precedent in the field, and just say, facts are facts, this isn't the way things are done. And that, if they're reasonable, I think that should probably work.
Right?
I have to say that the whole technique, and I know other people do that too, just let me get back to you on that, is really good, because in those situations, I have to sometimes think to myself, am I saying that we don't want to do this because I just don't want to do it?
Yeah.
Or is there a really good reason that we're not doing it? And just giving myself time to think about that. Either one reminds me why we aren't doing it, and my initial reaction of we don't do it is, probably because, we don't do it for this, and this reason. Or I think about it and think, well, maybe we could give it a try. But it's always, my default is, let me think about that.
Yeah, and I think during my process, we made a lot of changes that ended up being really helpful, that my first reaction is, oh, I don't want to do that. That's going to take me so much time, or that's going to be set. And it really wasn't once I got to the bottom of it. So I would say I only put a stop to things when they're really out there. And it's really not how publishing even works. And it's a misconception based on someone who is used to being a doctor instead of being a publisher, and they're just learning. So, yeah.
That's great. Okay, so we're going to take a break. If you have additional questions for these speakers, you can talk to them during the break or possibly in the last Q&A session as well. It's 2 o'clock now. Let's be back here at 2:15 for the last 3 speakers, and there should be snacks and drinks out in the lobby. Thank you.